Beloved, many people today are confused about the matter of tithing. Some think it belongs to the past, an old command under the Mosaic law, and therefore has no place in the life of a believer living under grace. Others cling to it out of habit, tradition, or even fear. But the truth, dear friend, is that tithing has never been just about law or ritual. It has always been about relationship and revelation. The misunderstanding of tithing has blinded many hearts to the joy and power hidden within this divine principle. When people say tithing is not for today, they often forget that the principle of giving to God existed long before the law. Abraham, the father of faith, gave a tenth to Melchizedek, not because Moses commanded him, but because his heart overflowed with gratitude toward the one who blessed him. This was centuries before the law was written. That moment was not a legal act. It was a spiritual revelation. Abraham recognized that everything he had, his victory, his wealth, his very breath, came from the Most High God. So he gave, not to earn God's favor, but to acknowledge it. This is where the misunderstanding begins in our time. Many think tithing is about buying blessings or earning grace. No, beloved, you cannot purchase what God freely gives. Grace cannot be bought, it can only be believed. The tithe is not payment, it is participation. It's the believer's declaration that, Lord, you are my source, you are my provider, all that I have is yours. When this truth is forgotten, giving becomes a burden. But when it is understood, giving becomes worship. There are those who say, God doesn't need my money. That is true. The Almighty owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He is not waiting for your envelope to survive. Yet, He allows you to give because He wants you to learn the language of faith. You see, the act of giving breaks the power of greed. It dethrones the idol of self. It reminds the soul that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. When we withhold from God, it is not because we lack. It is because we fear, and fear is the enemy of faith. Tithing teaches you to live above fear. Every time you release that portion, you are declaring to the heavens and to the powers of darkness, my trust is not in my paycheck, not in the economy, not in my own strength. My trust is in Lord who provides. That act of faith draws divine attention. God delights in those who trust Him completely. And when you give out of love, not out of law, you open a window for heaven's favor to flow. Let us be clear, tithing is not a sin. Misunderstanding it is. When you see it as a tax, you will feel robbed. When you see it as worship, you will feel blessed. When you give with hesitation, it becomes an obligation. But when you give with revelation, it becomes a celebration. The early church gave not because they were forced, but because they were filled with gratitude, with faith, with the Spirit of God. So, beloved, the misunderstanding of tithing has caused many to lose the blessing that follows obedience. God does not measure the amount, He measures the attitude. The heart of giving is greater than the hand that gives. When your heart is right, your giving becomes powerful. And when you give from revelation, not regulation, your offering rises like sweet incense before the throne of God. The misunderstanding of tithing ends when the heart understands this truth. God never takes to reduce you, He receives to release you. Beloved, when we speak about the heart behind the tithe, we are speaking about the deepest place of your relationship with God. The tithe is not about coins or currency, it is about connection. It is not a financial decision, it is a spiritual posture. When your heart is right before God, giving becomes natural, joyful, and powerful. But when the heart is filled with fear, doubt, or pride, even the act of giving can lose its meaning. God does not look at the amount in your hand, He looks at the attitude in your heart. From the beginning of time, God has never been after man's possessions, He has been after man's devotion. When Cain and Abel brought their offerings, both brought something to the altar, but only one was accepted. Why? Because God looked not at the gift, but at the giver's heart. Abel's offering came from faith and love. Cain's came from duty and pride. The difference was not in what they gave, but in how they gave. This is the mystery of the tithe. It reveals what is inside you. It is a mirror that shows whether you give because you trust or because you are trying to impress. You see, the heart behind the tithe must always be one of honor. When you give to God, you are saying, Lord, I honor you above my needs, my plans, and my fears. That moment of giving is an act of surrender. It is not God demanding, give me. It is the believer declaring, take, Lord, for all that I have belongs to you. In that act, the invisible bond between heaven and earth becomes visible. You step into the realm where giving becomes worship, not weight. There are many who give out of routine. They drop their offering into the basket, but their mind is far away. That kind of giving may satisfy the form, but it misses the fire. God is not moved by ritual, He is moved by relationship. When your heart burns with love, even the smallest gift becomes mighty in His sight. When the widow placed her 2 copper coins in the treasury, Jesus said she gave more than all others, because her heart was completely surrendered. She gave not out of abundance but out of faith. That is the kind of giving that shakes heaven. Tithing is never about impressing God. It is about inviting God. When you give from your heart, you are saying, Lord, I trust you to take care of what's left. It's easy to give when you have plenty, but it is faith that gives when things seem uncertain. The heart behind the tithe whispers, even if I have little, I will not withhold from you, because you never withhold from me. That faith attracts divine favor. God's eyes search for hearts that trust Him, so He may show Himself strong on their behalf. Remember, beloved, God owns everything. He doesn't need your 10%. He allows you to give it so your heart remains pure and your trust remains anchored. The moment you release your tithe, something happens in the unseen. You are aligning your heart with heaven's order. You are telling God you are first. And whenever you put God first, He takes care of the rest. If the heart is wrong, giving becomes a struggle. But if the heart is right, giving becomes a song. Every tithe, every offering, every act of generosity becomes a melody of gratitude that reaches the throne of grace. So, when you give, don't just open your wallet, open your heart. Let your giving be filled with faith, love, and thankfulness. For the true measure of your tithe is not in the amount you give, but in the heart that gives it. And when your heart is right, your tithe will not just leave your hand, it will touch heaven. Beloved, the struggle between law and grace has confused many believers. Some say tithing belongs to the Old Testament. It was a command under the law. Others say we live under grace now. We are free from such obligations. But hear this clearly, grace does not cancel truth. It completes it. The law showed us the pattern, but grace gives us the power to live it. Under the law, tithing was an instruction. Under grace, it becomes an inspiration. What was once commanded is now chosen out of love. The law demanded, grace invites. The law said, you must. Grace whispers, you may. And when the Spirit of God fills a heart, it no longer asks, how little can I give? But rather, how much can I love? Under the law, man gave because he had to. Under grace, man gives because he wants to. That is the difference between duty and delight. Grace transforms the heart so that giving is not an external act of obedience, but an internal overflow of gratitude. Think about it. Before the law was ever written, Abraham tithed. Before the 10 Commandments were ever carved, Jacob vowed to give a tenth to the Lord. They did not give because of Moses, they gave because of revelation. They saw God as their source, their protector, their covenant-keeping friend. When grace entered their hearts, giving flowed naturally. The same is true today. When grace truly touches a life, generosity becomes the evidence of transformation. The problem with many believers today is that they have misunderstood freedom. They think grace means permission to do less. But true grace empowers you to do more, not because you are forced, but because you are filled. Grace does not make you careless, it makes you capable. Under the law, 10% was the minimum under grace. There is no limit, because love knows no measure. When grace reigns in your heart, giving is not a burden. It becomes the language of your faith. Beloved, remember this. Grace does not free you from giving. It frees you to give with joy. The Pharisees gave with precision, but without passion. They calculated the tenth, but they missed the heart. Jesus did not condemn their giving. He condemned their coldness. He said, "These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone." In other words, keep giving, but let your giving flow from love, mercy, and faith. Grace teaches us to give not for approval, but from affection. When you live under grace, the tithe becomes a testimony. It says, "I give not because I'm bound by law, but because I'm liberated by love." The law said, "If you don't, you're cursed." Grace says, "Because you are blessed, you can." Under the law, man gave to avoid punishment. Under grace, man gives to express praise. What was once a command has become a celebration. You see, when you walk in grace, giving is no longer about calculation. It is about communion. The law tells you what you owe. Grace tells you who you are. You are a child of the King, not a servant counting coins. The tithe becomes a symbol of sonship, a declaration that everything you have belongs to your Father in heaven. And when you give with that understanding, your heart rejoices. So, is tithing a sin under grace? No. It is a sign of gratitude. Grace does not remove the principle, it restores the purpose. The same God who asked for the first fruits still delights in a generous heart. And grace empowers you to give not from fear, but from faith. When law and grace meet in your heart, obedience becomes joy, and giving becomes glory. For when grace reigns, the tithe is no longer a rule to follow, it becomes a revelation to live. Beloved, faith and obedience are the twin pillars upon which every blessing of the kingdom stands. You cannot separate the two. Faith without obedience is empty confession, and obedience without faith is lifeless routine. When God calls his people to give, to tithe, to sow, to bless, he is not testing their pocket, he is testing their trust. Every act of giving is a declaration of faith. It says, "Lord, I believe your word more than I believe my circumstances." It says, "I trust your promise more than I fear my lack." That is the power of obedience born out of faith. It activates heaven's abundance. When God told Abraham to leave his homeland, he obeyed even though he did not know where he was going. When God asked him to offer his son Isaac, he climbed the mountain with faith that God would provide. That same spirit must live in us today. Giving, beloved, is a journey up the mountain. Every time you release your tithe, you are walking up your own Mount Moriah. You are laying your trust on the altar, saying, "God, I believe you will provide." And just as God provided a ram for Abraham, he will provide for you when your obedience is rooted in faith. Faith is not believing that God can, it is believing that God will. It is easy to talk about faith when everything is comfortable, but true faith is proven in the test. When bills are high and income is low, that is when faith speaks loudest. The hand may tremble, but the heart must stand firm. You say, Lord, I will not rob you. I will not fear lack. I will not let my faith bow to my feelings. That moment of obedience opens a door that logic cannot open. The supernatural is always released on the other side of obedience. The world says, hold on to what you have, but heaven says, release what you hold. Because in the kingdom, multiplication begins with surrender. A seed in your hand can feed you for a moment, but a seed in God's hand can feed generations. That is why obedience is not loss, it is the key to increase. Every time you obey God in giving, you are planting faith in the soil of eternity. You may not see the harvest immediately, but God is faithful. He watches over every seed sown in faith and waters it with His promises. When you walk in obedience, you align yourself with divine order. God cannot pour abundance into a heart that resists His word. But when you yield, heaven responds. The windows of blessing open not because you demand them, but because obedience invites them. God said in His word, prove me now in this. Imagine that the Creator of heaven and earth saying, test me. He is not afraid of your obedience, He is eager to honor it. He is saying, if you trust me enough to obey, I will show you how faithful I am. Beloved, faith without obedience is like a lamp without oil. It may look right, but it has no light. When you obey God in giving, even when it seems unreasonable, you are proving your faith. You are saying, I choose God's voice over my fear. I choose His promise over my doubt. That kind of faith moves mountains. It breaks curses of lack and unlocks divine provision. Remember, obedience is not a punishment. It is a privilege. It is the proof that your faith is alive. God does not bless words, He blesses steps. When Peter obeyed Jesus and cast his net one more time, he caught more than he could contain. When the widow obeyed Elijah and gave her last meal, her jar never ran dry. When you obey God with your tithe, you position yourself for the miraculous. So, beloved, don't wait for perfect conditions to obey. Faith is not about seeing first, it's about trusting first. When you give in faith, you are writing a story of trust that heaven will honor. And when your obedience is mixed with faith, your life becomes a testimony that God's promises are still alive, His word still works, and His faithfulness never fails. Beloved, many people limit the meaning of tithing to money, but God's blessing reaches far beyond your bank account. The true reward of obedience is not measured in coins or currency. It is measured in peace, in protection, in provision, and in the deep sense of security that comes from knowing your life is in God's hands. When the Lord spoke through the prophet Malachi, He said, I will open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing you will not have room to receive. That word blessing is not limited to financial overflow. It speaks of wholeness, of divine favor that touches every area of your existence. When you walk in the principle of tithing, you invite God into the center of your life. You place Him not just over your income, but over your family, your health, your decisions, and your destiny. The tithe is not about transferring money from your pocket to the church. It is about transferring trust from yourself to your Creator. And when trust is established, God releases blessings that money could never buy. You begin to see His hand in situations that used to bring you fear. Doors begin to open, opportunities begin to appear, and peace begins to rule your mind. God promised, I will rebuke the devourer for your sake. The devourer represents everything that steals your peace, drains your strength, or destroys your fruit. It may come as unexpected debt, sickness, broken relationships, or emotional weariness. But when you walk in obedience, God Himself steps in as your defender. He says, I will rebuke, not the preacher, not the pastor, but God Himself will stand between you and every force that tries to consume your blessing. That is protection beyond measure. That is divine insurance no policy can match. The blessing beyond the bank account is that your life becomes untouchable in the hands of God. When the Israelites obeyed the principles of giving, their clothes did not wear out, their shoes did not tear, and their crops did not fail. That same God has not changed. He still watches over those who honor Him first. Your tithe becomes a spiritual shield that surrounds your labor. The enemy may try to attack, but he will not prevail, because obedience places you under divine covering. So many people chase after material prosperity, yet they cannot sleep at night. They have money but no peace, success but no satisfaction. Beloved, true prosperity is not having more things, it is having more of God. It is when your heart rests in Him so deeply that nothing can shake your joy. When you honor God with your tithe, you are declaring, Lord, you are my portion, you are my provider, you are my peace. And in return, He gives you what no salary or investment can provide, the calm assurance that everything will be all right. Sometimes the blessing of obedience is not immediate increase, but divine stability. You may not see a flood of money overnight, but you will see that what you have begins to stretch farther than before. Things last longer, crises seem smaller. God begins to manage your life in ways that defy explanation. That is the quiet power of obedience. The tithe sanctifies the rest. When the first tenth is placed in God's hands, He places His touch on the remaining 90. That touch multiplies peace, guards your home, and guides your steps. The world counts blessings in possessions, but heaven counts blessings in presence. When you tithe with faith, God's presence increases around you. Your home feels lighter, your mind clearer, your heart more thankful. You start to notice miracles that were once invisible, the job that came just in time, the healing that surprised the doctors, the opportunity that opened from nowhere. These are the fingerprints of a faithful God responding to a faithful giver. Beloved, never reduce God's promise to a financial formula. The blessing that follows obedience is not just wealth, it is wholeness. It is the joy of knowing that the God who owns heaven and earth walks with you, watches over you, and provides for you. When you give from the heart, He fills your life not only with provision, but with peace, protection, and purpose. That is the blessing beyond the bank account, the abundant life that only obedience can unlock. Beloved, everything we are and everything we have belongs to God. The air we breathe, the strength in our bodies, the talents in our hands, the wisdom in our minds, all of it comes from Him. We are not owners, we are stewards. The moment this truth settles in our hearts, our entire view of giving changes. We no longer ask, how much should I give? We begin to say, how much can I return to the one who has given me everything? The ultimate truth about the tithe is that it is not about subtraction, it is about acknowledgement. It is our way of saying, Lord, you are the source. Without you I am nothing. With you I have everything. When you hold back what belongs to God, you are not keeping something small. You are blocking something great. You see, giving is not about money leaving your hand. It's about faith leaving your heart and returning as a blessing. The tithe is a symbol of surrender, a statement of trust, and a declaration of ownership, not yours, but God's. When you bring your tithe before Him, you are placing your life in divine alignment with heaven's order. You are saying, Lord, I recognize that you reign over my life, over my house, over my future. And in that act of recognition, something powerful happens. What you have becomes blessed, and who you are becomes secure. We live in a world that teaches possession, mine, my job, my money, my success. But the kingdom teaches submission, His will, His purpose, His glory. The moment you understand that everything is His, you are free from the chains of greed and fear. You no longer live counting what you have, you live celebrating who you have. When God becomes your source, shortage loses its voice. You can stand in the middle of uncertainty and still say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That is the power of a heart that knows who owns it all. When you tithe, you are not making God richer. You are making your soul righter. You are keeping your heart soft, humble, and thankful. You are reminding yourself that your blessings did not appear by chance. They came by grace. That awareness produces worship. Giving becomes a spiritual rhythm, a heartbeat of gratitude. It keeps you anchored in the truth that the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Every time you give, you are declaring ownership back to its rightful place. You are saying, "God, you are the beginning and the end of my supply." Beloved, when your heart aligns with heaven, your hands become instruments of blessing. You stop clinging and you start channeling. God never meant for His people to be storage containers. He made them conduits. He blesses you not so you can keep everything, but so you can carry His goodness to others. The tithe is the training ground of that flow. If you can trust Him with the first tenth, He can trust you with the rest. If you can release what you have, He can release what He has, and what He has is limitless. Many struggle with giving because they still see it as loss. But when you give what belongs to God, you are not losing, you are returning. You are sending it back into the hands of the one who multiplies. Remember, beloved, God is not trying to take from you. He is trying to teach you the joy of living under His ownership. When He owns it all, you lack nothing. When He is first, everything else falls into place. This is the highest truth. Ownership belongs to God, but stewardship belongs to us. The way you handle what He places in your hands reveals how much you trust His heart. And when you live with that revelation, your giving is no longer mechanical. It becomes miraculous. You stop living in fear of running out because you know the owner never runs dry. You begin to walk in a flow of grace where generosity becomes your lifestyle and gratitude your language. Beloved, when you understand that God owns it all, you live free. You give freely, love deeply, and trust completely. Your tithe becomes a covenant reminder that you are not alone in your labor. Heaven is working with you. And when heaven is your partner, lack becomes impossible. So live every day knowing this powerful truth. You are not the owner, you are the vessel. And when the vessel stays open, the oil never stops flowing. Beloved, the act of giving, the tithe, the offering, the sacrifice, is not just a duty or a tradition. It is the expression of *** alignment between heaven and your heart ***. When your spirit is connected to God, your life begins to flow in divine rhythm. The tithe is not simply a financial principle. It is a *** spiritual covenant *** that keeps you connected to the source of all blessing. When you give, you are not performing a ritual. You are entering into a relationship of trust, faith, and partnership with the Almighty. This is where the real power lies, not in the amount you give, but in the alignment of your heart with God's kingdom. Many believers live frustrated because they are blessed on paper, but disconnected in practice. They work hard, yet there's no peace. They earn much, yet they never feel secure. Why? Because the connection is broken. The principle of tithing restores that connection. It says to heaven, **Lord, I recognize your hand in my life. I acknowledge you as the first, not the last. I invite you into my finances, my home, and my future. When that happens, God breathes upon what you have. The little becomes much, the ordinary becomes anointed, and the natural becomes supernatural. Beloved, when your heart aligns with God, you begin to think like Him. The tithe is not a transaction. It is a *** transformation ***. It transforms how you see what you have. Instead of living in fear of losing, you start living in faith of giving. You stop counting what's in your wallet and start trusting what's in His Word. And that shift of mindset changes everything. Because heaven only responds to faith, not fear. The moment you give with faith, you are saying, Lord, I believe you are bigger than my bills, greater than my needs, and faithful to your word. That confession unlocks divine favor. When you hold on to what you have, your hands are closed, but when you give, your hands open, and open hands are the kind God fills. The tithe teaches you the posture of open, handed living ***. You become free from greed, free from anxiety, free from the illusion of control. God cannot pour into a clenched fist, but when your heart is aligned with His purpose, giving becomes the natural language of your love. You begin to see yourself not as a receiver, but as a ** channel ***, a vessel through which God's blessings flow to others. Beloved, the power of alignment is that it draws divine order into your life. When you put God first, everything else begins to find its rightful place. Confusion turns to clarity, chaos turns to calm, scarcity turns to sufficiency. The blessing of God is not just in receiving more, it's in living right. And when your heart is right, God can trust you with abundance. That's why Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you." The tithe is one way of seeking first. It's saying, before I touch anything, I honor you first. When your heart aligns with heaven, giving becomes more than a gesture. It becomes a ** declaration, ***. You are declaring that God is Lord over your life, that no situation can outgive Him, and that no circumstance can break your faith. That declaration invites God's presence to dwell in your affairs. His favor surrounds you like a shield. His peace fills your house. His wisdom begins to guide your decisions. You start walking not by sight, but by revelation, because giving opens your eyes to the unseen riches of the kingdom. Beloved, this is the secret of spiritual prosperity. It's not about having more. It's about being in ** alignment ** with the one who owns it all. When you live in that alignment, every part of your life reflects His order, your finances, your relationships, your emotions, your future. The tithe keeps you grounded in gratitude and lifted in faith. It reminds you daily that everything you have is a trust and everything you give is a testimony. So give not to impress, but to ** express ** your love. Give not out of habit, but out of harmony with heaven. Because when your heart beats in rhythm with God's will, every act of giving becomes a doorway for His glory to enter your life. And when His glory fills your life, lack loses its grip, fear loses its voice, and your life becomes a living testimony that ***, when the heart aligns with heaven, the blessings of God have no limit. Beloved, there is a mystery in giving that many have not yet understood, the mystery of how God takes what leaves your hand and turns it into something that never leaves your life. Giving is not an earthly act, it is a heavenly exchange. Every time you release what you have into the hands of God, something divine begins to move on your behalf. The 8th revelation of tithing is that ***, what you release, becomes a seed ***, and every seed sown in faith carries a future harvest. You may forget what you give, but heaven never does. God remembers every act of obedience, every sacrifice born of faith, every tear shed in trust. Beloved, nothing you give to God ever dies. It may leave your hand, but it does not leave your destiny. Just like a seed buried in the soil, it seems lost for a time, but in the hidden places it begins to grow. You may not see the sprouting, you may not feel the growth, but God is working beneath the surface. The tithe is not about losing, it is about planting **. It is about putting something into the ground of God's promises so that your life can reap what only heaven can grow. This is why God said, "Prove me now in this." He was saying, "Put your seed in my soil and watch what I will do." When you give, you are not just obeying a command, you are activating a covenant. God is a God of patterns and principles. He multiplies what is surrendered, not what is hoarded. When the little boy in the gospel gave his 5 loaves and 2 fish, he didn't lose them, he placed them into divine hands. And what was ordinary became supernatural. Thousands were fed, and there were still baskets left over. That's what happens when you give. Your little becomes much, your ordinary becomes extraordinary. God takes what you release and multiplies it beyond what your logic can calculate. Beloved, you may look at what you have and think it's too small to matter. But God has never needed size. He looks for sincerity. He takes what is small when it's wrapped in faith. The widow who gave her last coin gave more than all the rich because her giving came from her heart, not her surplus. God measures the value of your offering not by its amount, but by its sacrifice. Every act of faith moves the hand of God. Every time you give when it hurts, heaven notices. Every time you choose trust over fear, God takes record, and in due time, that seed begins to speak for you. Sometimes the harvest comes in unexpected forms. You may not receive the same thing you gave, but you will receive what you need. You give money, but God gives peace. You give time, but God gives strength. You give your first fruits, and God gives you favor that money cannot buy. That is the divine law of seed and harvest. What you plant in obedience grows in grace. What you release in faith returns, multiplied in blessing. The tithe is not just a number. It is a spiritual principle that governs the flow of blessing. Beloved, never underestimate what happens when you give with the right heart. The moment you place your tithe before God, it is not just an offering, it becomes a testimony. It speaks in the unseen world. It declares that your trust is not in your job, not in your account, not in human systems, but in the living God who never fails. And that declaration moves heaven on your behalf. It summons favor, protection, provision, and peace. God watches over the faithful giver, because the faithful giver reminds him of his own nature, for God himself is the greatest giver of all. He gave his only Son. He sowed one life to reap a family of believers. That is the heart of giving, not losing, but multiplying. Every time you give, you reflect the heart of your Father. You step into the divine nature of generosity that governs heaven. And when your life mirrors God's nature, heaven cannot help but respond. Blessings chase you, goodness follows you, and grace covers you. So, beloved, never see your tithe as an expense. See it as an investment into eternity. What leaves your hand enters God's plan. It will return in ways you never imagined, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For every seed sown in faith carries a promise, and every act of obedience writes a story of God's faithfulness. When you give, you are not diminishing, you are multiplying. Because what you place in God's hands never disappears. It only transforms, increases, and returns, bearing fruit for your future and glory to His name.